One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
All right, good afternoon, I5 Space. Thank you for everyone who is turning in on our I5 YouTube channel or on our I5 website. And thank you so much to Colonel Fernengel for joining us today. I am Cadet Evangeline Cernas, the Outreach Team Commander for I5 Space, and we are so excited to have this very special I5 STRAT Talk today with Colonel Christopher A. Fernengel. Colonel Christopher A. Fernengel is the director of the Commander's Action Group at U.S. Space Command. He is an ROTC graduate of Ohio University and a career space professional. He has commanded at the squadron and Delta level and has deployed and commanded troops in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for being here today, sir.
Awesome.
Yeah. So my first question after reading your bio is, can you speak more on the various deployments and educations that have come along with that? I think that last sentence that I read is quite unusual for like Space Force specific Guardians. So if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for hosting me, and also thanks for all the work you guys are doing, across the level and then at the individual detachments and getting Guardians ready to join the formations. So, while you said I'm a career space professional, I've done satellite command and control, I've done space domain awareness, I've done things like that. Primarily, most of my assignments have been electromagnetic warfare, or EW. And so I was operations officer at the Space Aggressors. I was squadron commander, deployed commander, and then adult for EW units. And what's unique about those units is primarily, not all, but most of the Space Force Guardians are operating systems, either CONUS in the United States or in other geographically separated units, but basically at fixed sites, fixed bases with a lot of infrastructure. For EW specifically, and also a lot of our intel professionals, there's an expeditionary nature of the Space Force. Basically, you have to, because of the capabilities and the threat, you have to get closer in to that threat to be effective. And so I've commanded Guardians in Syria, Jordan, Niger, Qatar, Afghanistan, and a host of other locations. And so a lot of times people are like, hey, I'm going to join the Space Force. I'm going to be in Colorado for my entire 20 years. And that's just because most of those people that I mentioned that had deployed forward to do the EW mission were stationed in Colorado. So they were here, got trained, and then they pushed forward for 4 to 6 months to execute the mission. And so that expeditionary nature is a little bit different than the majority of the Space Force, but there are opportunities to not only deploy, but to do overseas assignments in some of the Space Force components as they get attached to the command commanders and other things. Exciting.
Wow, that's super cool. And I guess along with that, as you are a member of the Space Force, I'm sure you've seen the importance and impact of its core values, which for anyone watching, it's character, connection, commitment, and courage. I'd like to add another C in there, which I guess is culture. And based on what we've talked about, it seems to me that those first 4 values cannot exist if there isn't a solid culture. So could you speak on the importance of culture and how it relates to your leadership as a Guardian?
Oh, absolutely. So culture is everything. I mean, that bottom line. And I mentioned primarily an EW space professional, really built on expeditionary nature of the mission, but it doesn't, it applies to whether you're sitting at Schriever Space Force Base or Beagle or up in Batufik doing the ground-based radar mission. Culture is the foundation for everything we do. And so what I mean by that is you can go back and forth of if creating an effective culture is an effective team, or I look at it from a family perspective. You are on the Guardian and airmen, because as you know, airmen support a lot of the Space Force missions to the
Yeah.
left and right. And so if you don't build a healthy relationship with those people through connection, and play your emotional, your moral, your physical commitment to courage, then you're not going to go very far because you're not going to build the trust. And along with culture, if you create an effective culture in a unit, either the small team level, whether that be a crew operating a weapon system, or a flight commander, or a squadron commander, or whatnot, you've got to build that trust. And when you build trust into the relationships that you're developing, it will build a healthy culture in a unit, and then that can kind of be scaled up at the Delta level or higher.
Got it. That I think that's so fascinating. And I think as you've served in both, how do you think, or how have you seen, is the Air Force's culture different from the Space Forces, or are they different at all?
Yeah, I think they're different. I mean, obviously the Space Force was birthed out of the Air Force, but along the way in the last 4 years, we've taken a lot of new accessions. We've also been the recipient of inter-service transfers, whether that be from the Navy,
Right.
and so that has really shifted into what I would consider a culture of its own. And the big difference I see, and I've sat on promotion boards, I've sat on school boards, either intermediate or senior level education, a selection for operations officers and squadron commanders, and the striking difference between the Air Force and the Space Force is just the size. I mean,
okay, got it.
The Air Force is well over 300,000, and on the calculations, you hear the number a lot of 18,000 members of the Space Force. Well, more than half of that is civilians, and then so you break down officers, and then it's roughly 50-50, and so amount of time you can do to deliberately develop and lead a guardian to meet what they're looking for in the service and give them a sense of purpose, and also to help them find their way of something they're interested in, or staying in that specific discipline, is a lot easier to do with the number of people. And so I guess I would boil it down to kind of personal attention for each thing coming in. And you mentioned the fourth C. I'll add 5 and 6 as we go along the way, but communication. For an individual guardian to have direct communication at the 05 and 06 level as the person that is sitting on those boards and really working their career development path is just phenomenal.
Yeah, for sure. So then I guess do you want to expand a little bit on what you mean by communication and where that falls into all the other aspects, or why it should be like so significant to be its own in terms of the C's?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's its own. So that might have been a slight misspeak, but it runs through all of them.
Yeah, of course.
And it also ties to what you alluded to with culture. And so what I mean by that, and I'll kind of go back to my squadron commander time, because that's the time where I was the closest to kind of the element formation with the ability to impact. And so a leader, whether that be a squadron commander, flight commander, or crew commander, only has very minimal touch points with communication with the folks that they lead. It's really just service for the whole organization and affects the culture. And what I mean by that is they're not able to have sensors to understand some of the things that could be improved in the future, and don't have the opportunity to understand what the pain points are. And so to kind of tie it together, when I look at communication mechanisms, it can't be just a once a month or once a quarter communication from that leader, that in this case, the squadron commander, to the officers enlisted of that squadron. So you need to build in other touch points. So for me specifically, what was important and part of the culture, especially for an expeditionary, is use PT. So
Yeah.
at PT Monday, Wednesday, Friday at the and what we did was on, for instance, on Monday, it was at the flight level. On Wednesdays, it was a rotating flight led PT. Again, everyone was there.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
Friday, I led it myself.
Mhm.
And so I would lead PT, and a lot of people thought I just really like to do PT, which I do. But
Yeah.
what they often didn't realize was that was just solid gold in the form of communication. So
Yeah.
we would lead our stretches. We would make announcements that would
Mhm.
need to be understood by the formation, and then, no kidding, as we're stretching, kind of go around the circle as, hey, do you have anything for the group? Do you have anything for the group? And that's a
Yeah.
way of communication. We also had something called roll call at the end of
Mhm.
the week to kind of the last formation. We had a heritage room, which we were very fortunate to have,
Mhm.
and so we shared stories, we aired grievances, but
Oh,
we
yeah.
also had an opportunity for anyone in the formation, it doesn't matter if you're the specialist one or you're the lieutenant colonel, to share information that was important for the group to know. So you would kind of
Oh,
tie off the last week as a
yeah.
recap. We would look forward to the next week, and then things like staff meetings. But in certain squadrons, not everyone goes to staff meetings.
Mhm.
But the P and the roll call was a mechanism for communication where everyone in the squadron was able to hear directly from the commander, directly from the leadership, and also
Yeah.
questions of, especially that roll call. Hey, sir,
Yeah.
we're hearing rumors that this has happened. Like, okay, well,
Mhm.
just text, this is kind of what's happening, or clarifying, or, uh, you know, confirming. It's a way of, again, solidifying the culture of trust by
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. I wouldn't even think that PT could be utilized that way. So then, I guess speaking on leadership, because I assume like that's super impactful from like everyone, like what you said, from the specialist one to the lieutenant colonel. Looking back on your career, who or what has impacted you the most? Like, I guess in a way that like say this style of PT has impacted everyone in your unit.
Yeah, so definitely mentors. I would put the bumper
Mm-hmm.
stickers, but a lot of times people think that's people only senior to them. Like, so for a colonel,
Mm-hmm.
general officers, I
Yeah.
would say, I'm going to redefine mentorship for you,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then add influencers. So
Yeah.
mentorship 360, for sure.
Gotcha.
Certainly have senior officers that have mentored me from being a lieutenant and seeing something in me that they liked, and many things to fix along the way, trust me,
Yeah.
where
Right.
they gave me feedback
Mm-hmm.
and they developed me into the officer I've become.
Of course.
All peers, peer,
Mm.
you should never look at over the ability to get peer feedback. Sometimes I use the phrase, feedback is a gift. It's how I show my love when I'm
Mm-hmm.
giving sessions, because sometimes it's hard to hear. If you
It
do a
is.
feedback, whether that be from a subordinate or a peer, and you're hoping that all you're going to hear is, "Oh, you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job." I just consider that a waste of time. Like, there can be
Yes. Yeah.
element. You can certainly give feedback of, you're doing this and this right, but here's the things I want you to work on. That's the value. I mean,
Yeah.
feedback
I
is a
agree.
gift. But the thing that a lot of people overlook is mentorship from subordinates. And so as a squadron,
Mm.
I had who I would consider influencers at every level, on officer and enlisted ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would have built-in sensors, and you have to lead and manage that trust very uh, selectively.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a way for them to feel comfortable in a very tactful, professional way of giving
Yeah.
you feedback of things that they're seeing that maybe you could improve on. And
Mm-hmm.
so, to get to your point, mentorship is totally 360 degrees. Not only your superiors, your peers, but also your subordinates.
I love that. I would not have thought of it being 360 because what we're encouraged to do in ROTC is to find someone above us. So yeah, I think that's super valuable, and I totally see the impact of that on a whole. Pivoting a little bit, based on your experience, what qualities do you believe are most important for effective leadership? And I'm sure that that's changed as you've gone through your career, and then also with 360 mentorship and influence.
Yeah, I think listening is probably the biggest. Yeah, and listening to understand, not listening to respond.
Ooh, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
We're kind of scripted to hear a question and respond, or hear a grievance against us or the organization and respond, kind of justifying that. But if you take the time and you listen to understand, and then you actually work through kind of what's going on, you the majority of the time you come to a much better solution. The other thing is adaptability. And one thing I kind of felt like when I was going through ROTC, and even as a lieutenant, there's like this cookie cutter answer from an academic level of what a good leader is, and that's just not the case. And I wrote an article about shotgun leadership, and sometimes that phrase is considered a bad thing, but the way if you're familiar with firearms, a shotgun can take many different forms of ammunition. Gotcha. And some of that ammunition is made like a slug to shoot a deer. Some is made for home protection. Some is made for a specific type of bird. There's various things. And the reason I use that is, as you go through your career, whether that be a flight commander, a staff officer, squadron commander, a deployment leader, you're going to have to shift your leadership style to kind of the environment you're in and who you're working with. I can tell you, gotcha. I lead the staff that I'm privileged to be a part of and lead in a combatant commander headquarters staff much differently than I got to lead my team in Afghanistan. Much different that I got to lead a team in special operations. So you have to be. Now, it does go back to the 4 C's of the Space Force as far as values, but the way of executing and communicating is different. And you just need to get people in that, realize that you will have to adapt as the leader, not necessarily vice versa.
Gotcha. So then how have you developed those qualities from your ROTC time to being a lieutenant to now being a colonel? Because I know you said in ROTC, you're taught a cookie cutter type of leadership, but now it's much different than that.
Yeah, I just think it's experience. Sometimes we confuse when we say there's wisdom from a person, that they're smarter than anyone. And that's not necessarily the case. They just have more experience. And so what I would say, I've made a ton of mistakes along the way, but luckily I've had leadership that has trusted me and given me feedback to get better and to improve things. And also I've seen things, either I've made the mistake and failed, or I've seen other people. And so when I see that situation later, I can address the problem, or address the situation before it becomes a problem.
Gotcha. So then I guess with missions and operations, since you spent so much of your career in operations, in terms of like our conversation today and the 4 C's of the Space Force and the mission of the Air Force, do you think that the mission will shape the culture, or does the culture impact the outcome of the mission, or is it kind of a combination of both, depending on who you're with?
It's definitely a combination. The culture shape how effective the mission is, certainly.
Okay, got it.
So if you don't have a solid culture where you have built upon trust of your teammates, you're not going to be as effective in executing the mission as possible. But certainly, the nature of the mission will dictate some of the culture. And you look at subcultures, right? So you look at special operations, or in the Space Force, you look at what I would consider kind of the expeditionary subculture, where
Mhm.
where you have to develop a form of conditioning of kind of being responsive, kind of being adaptable, being able
Mhm.
to have your gear ready and be a trained professional ready to deploy around the world in very short timeline. And
Right.
so in that time frame, and it's not unlike the mission driving the culture in the employed in place
Mhm. Mhm.
places, or places like ground-based radar sites, where that is a 24/7 mission. Many of those missions are no-fail missions that our national security depends on, our way
Yeah.
of life, the American way of life, our allies and partners around the world are counting on. And so when you talk about the mission dictating the culture, those are things where the culture has to be reliable. They have to be trained and ready all the time, and they
Mhm.
have to be able to operate in both a benign and a contested environment. So, like you said, it's a
Mm.
combination of both.
Interesting. So, follow-up question to that, what do you mean by the last like few words that you said, benign and contested environment? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, for the large part of kind of the space evolution, starting
Mhm.
with getting launched and through many
Yeah.
decades. Space was a benign environment. Certainly, there were
Gotcha.
objects in space, not only satellites, but pieces of debris that could collide. But there weren't, uh, it wasn't militarization or weaponization. There
Right.
weren't threats, counter space threats like we're seeing now. And so
Right.
China is
Right.
developing counter space capabilities and deploying those on orbit at breathtaking speed. They are also creating space capabilities for the Joint Force to space-enabled attack against our Joint Force, specifically things like the Carrier Strike Group in Indo-PACOM area.
Yeah.
And Russia has a host of not only on-orbit counter space capabilities, but GPS jammers, other satellite communications jammers. I mean, we're talking
Mhm.
hundreds. And so when I talk
Mm.
being in a benign environment where there's not real threats beyond the domain itself, and
Mhm.
well, debris, we've seen an increase in both the number of debris as more and more things get on orbit. So around 45,000
Mm.
track every day that we're making sure we're screening to um, hope hopefully not allow any satellites to collide with each other. But we also
Mhm.
have addition really in the last 15 to 20 years of our competitors developing and deploying these counter space capabilities to try to negate our ability to use space for the Joint Force.
So then, what do you think, for at least like for us in I-5 as cadets who are hoping to join the Space Force, what do you think is most important now, when it comes to defining the characteristic of like the space domain as like how where it's going and what it will look like in the future in terms of warfighting?
Yeah, so the way I'll couch it is kind of three elements. Right
Mhm.
now, the Space Force and Space Command have a responsibility to provide space capabilities to the Joint Force, our nation, and our allies. You
Mhm.
all are tracking just the global economy
Right.
and how reliant it is on space, but so is our way of war. And
Yeah.
so services really since Desert Storm
Mhm.
have become reliant on space capabilities to become more efficient, more effective, and more lethal. If you look at
Yeah.
back in using an air example back to World War II, and if you've watched the show Masters of Air, it's a good
Yep.
example where you
Mhm.
see hundreds of bombers. And I
Mhm.
think one of the missions there is almost 1,000 bombers, and each
Wow.
of the bombers has 10 to 15 airmen of it. So we're talking 10 to 15,000 going after a single target. Um, and in a lot of cases, during daylight strategic bombing, they didn't hit the target. So you're talking about a single target, 1,000 bombers, potentially 15,000 airmen at risk, and you didn't even hit the target. Now fast forward to now, or day. You have a 2-ship of B2s, so 2 aircraft coming off the flight line, maybe 2 to 3 aircraft going over a single target. Along the way, they're getting weather from satellites. They're getting potentially updates on targeting from ISR satellites. They have got continuous command and control through SATCOM. They've got accurate position navigation and timing through the GPS constellation for refueling and also for dropping their munitions using GPS-aided missions. So as we compare and compare World War II versus present day, 1,000 bombers, 15,000 airmen, maybe not hitting the target, to 2 B2s, 4 air crew, and not only going single target, but maybe going after 30 to 40 targets. And so with that efficiency, that effectiveness, that lethality, using that air model, the service has built their force structure to become reliant on it. So that's one. Base capabilities to the joint force. This is, we have a responsibility to protect and defend against those threats that I mentioned, from the terrestrial jammers, directed energy, things on orbit. We have a responsibility as a service and a command to protect and defend our capabilities that allow those services to go to the joint force from our adversary. And then the third is we've got to protect the joint force from space-enabled attack. And what I mean by that is, as we look at our competitors, PRC and Russia, namely, they are in capabilities, whether that be their own position, navigation, timing, their own ISR, their own targeting indicators, to negate those capabilities to effectively target our forces. So those kind of are the 3 elements. I will add in a 4th, and that's on kind of the evolution of us going beyond geosynchronous orbit. So geosynchronous orbit, 36,000 kilometers. We've primarily, as a military, operated at geosynchronous orbit and in. If you use a Navy example, they'll talk about the brown water and blue water Navy, or the brown water being kind of close in. So I would describe the Space Force as over the and even when I was part of the Air Force before 19, primarily being focused on those littoral, geosynchronous, and in regions. That's where all of our satellite communication and missile warning, position navigation has been. But I see an evolution as we go beyond and start focusing not only NASA, but industry and military advantage in space beyond that, right, to cislunar and beyond. And so as we look at that, as we looked at sustained maneuver to keep satellites in orbit, as we look at potentially more humans than the traditional 10 we have on orbit between the International Space Station and the Chinese Space Station, and that's get more and more populated, and more emphasis on global commons beyond geosynchronous, cislunar, Mars, and things like that. There's new missions that evolve, and it's pretty exciting. I had the privilege to go down to Boca Chica and meet with Elon Musk about 6 weeks ago, and got to see the Starship on the pad and got to see that launch. And
that's amazing.
If you can imagine 1,000 starships, and if you see them in person, they're just massive. But roughly 1,000 starships to do colonization of Mars, and that's not something we do with the military. But there's certainly going to be an aspect that between commercial, civil, and military operating in the same domain, we'll have to understand the business rules and the norms of behavior. So pretty exciting.
That's super exciting. That's so exciting. Okay, so thank you so much for that. So I guess finally, from a leadership perspective, and from again, like an ROTC grad perspective, do you have any advice to any of the cadets who are watching, who are hoping to join the Space Force and are hoping to make a difference such as you have? For
Yep.
wrap up.
Two things.
Two things.
It's another C. The first one
Love it.
It's be curious. It's get out of your comfort zone. The quicker you can become comfortable with being uncomfortable, the better off you are. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to ask dumb questions. You're going to look silly. That's okay.
Yeah.
It is what it is. That's part of your development. And then the second thing is, and something I've really tried to live by is do your every day. I may not enjoy every second of my day, but I most days. And I try to live by the motto of earning it. And so it's not lost on me that I was not the best cadet. I probably was not the best. I'm certainly not the best, but I've got better along the way. And it's from development, from superiors, peers, and subordinates along the way. And every day I do try my best. I try to learn something, and I give it my best effort and make tons of mistakes and fail. But I try to, I'd much rather make 1,000 mistakes once than one mistake 1,000 times. So learn from your.
Ooh, that's really good. That's really good. I love that. You said, make 1,000 mistakes once and make one mistake 1,000 times.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that. Yeah, and I think a lot of us are going to field training in the upcoming weeks, myself included. So that's very good to keep in mind. So this concludes all of our questions. Thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with us. We really appreciate it. And yeah, we're just so grateful to be serving with leaders of character such as yourself. So thank you again so much for your time. Thank you so much.
It was an honor, and I really appreciate all the work you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you.